So I have these 6 boards that I got from a contract manufacturer. They are serial interface boards that go onto an existing product that I designed for a client of mine. But when we got them back from the manufacturer, they didn't work. The problem was that we'd accidentally sent them an earlier version of the manufacturing plots which had 2 tracks missing. So each of these boards requires 2 bodge-wires to be fitted. And the easiest way to do that was simply to make up 2 little wires from this Vero wire. This is a enameled copper wire, so it's an insulated copper wire. And here I am, I'm just cutting 2 wires of roughly the same length for each of the 6 boards. This wire is great stuff for adding fixes to circuit boards because it's really fine. It's quite easy to work with and it's insulated, so they can cross over components and tracks, and they can touch vias and things, and they won't short anything out. It's like a varnish enamel that's on them. The problem with that is that you have to remove some of the enamel to solder them onto the boards, but as you'll see, I do that in a minute and it's pretty straightforward. So here we are. I have 12 little bodge wires, all roughly the same length, and I've managed not to sneeze and blow them off the work surface. And so the next thing to do is to tin the ends of these wires. And by tinning the ends of these wires, that will automatically burn off some of the enamel coating, just enough to allow me to solder them back onto the boards in the right place. So I get my soldering iron and I clean the tip, and then on the tip I put a little pool of solder. The smoke you can see coming off there is the flux and the solder burning off. Then I just dip the end of the copper wire into the pool of solder on the end of my soldering iron. It burns off a tiny little piece of the enamel, and it also tins the end of the wire. So I have 12 of these wires to do. That's 24 ends to tin. And as you're doing this, the enamel kind of contaminates the little pool of solder that you have on the end of your soldering iron. So from time to time, I just clean the tip of the soldering iron and reapply a little pool of solder again. Now, these wires are really fine, and I have big chunky hands, but I'm managing okay, I think, here to tin the ends of there I am cleaning the tip and reapplying a nice clean pool of solder to the end of the soldering iron. Yeah, so I kind of managing not too bad to handle these tiny little bits of wire. They're quite difficult to pick up off the bench. So there we go, that's all 12 wires, all 24 ends, tinned and ready to go. The next job is to attach these wires to the boards, and to do that I always use flux whenever I'm soldering or resoldering onto circuit boards. This is a kind of tacky flux. It's called a no-rinse flux, but that really just means that you don't have to wash it off and it won't corrode the circuit board, but it still does leave behind a sticky residue. So later on I will wash the flux residue off using isopropyl alcohol. But for now, I use the flux, and it just ensures that when I'm soldering these wires on, I won't get any solder bridges. and that will get a good clean reflow of the existing solder merged with the tinning on the end of the wires to create a really good solid and permanent joint. But when you heat the flux, it gives off quite a bit of nasty, smelly smoke, and I find that if I don't use my fume absorber when I'm working with flux, that quite quickly end up with a bit of a headache. So I'll always use the fume absorber when I'm working with flux. So there I am trying to pick up one tiny little wire in my hand and get my soldering iron, just flowing the flux around the part where I need to solder the wire, and you see the smoke that came off it. But you see it quite effectively being sucked up by the fume absorber. It's basically just a big fan with a graphite filter on it. It's nothing special. It's not connected to the outside world in any way. It's not ducted through a vent to the outside or anything. And there I am, soldering the other end of the wire. I'm soldering this onto individual pins of an SOIC 16, and if I hadn't used fluxes this would just be impossible because I'm soldering to adjacent pins, and I would just end up with solder bridge between the pins, and then you would spend ages with your soldering iron and so on trying to chase down the solder bridge and get rid of it. But if you use the flux, it just prevents all that. It's kind of like magic pixie dust for soldering. I just solder each end of both of the wires into place. And that's it. First board done. Later on I will, after I've tested these boards and make sure they're all working, I will anchor down the bodge wires using some form of adhesive. I'll probably just use the silicon conformal coating because it's clear and it's transparent, and it's quite tacky, so it'll hold down the wires and it'll keep them from moving about. But it's not strictly necessary because these boards go inside little plastic enclosures and they're not user visible. Nobody's going to be touching these boards once they're installed anyway. But it just adds a bit of rigidity and something permanent to the wires, holds them down onto the board. I could use, hot melt glue or something similar, but the conformal coating also will prevent any corrosion from any moisture in the atmosphere as well. The conformal coating contains xylene, which is also quite a nasty compound, so whenever I'm using that, again, I use the fume absorber on the bench and I work closely to it. That is 2 boards done, 4 to go. So I've just had another batch of 50 of these boards made in China, but this time I've definitely sent them the right manufacturing plots, so I won't have to do any more of these remedial repairs, or bodge wires as I call them. But there we go, that's all 6 boards done, and I think this job took probably about half an hour in total from start to finish. It's not shown here, but the next stage was just to clean all the flux off of these boards using isopropyl alcohol, and then test, and I'm happy to say they all worked fine. So if you don't mind, thumbs up and subscribe, it always helps. Thanks for watching.